like to know actually what discovering him was like for you. That's a big new filmmaker to find out and feel comfortable with.
I often find myself very fortunate that directors I admire, I get on with. And I don't know what it was. Perhaps I just had an instinct that we would connect in on the same level about many things. And when I met him, I sort of felt like I'd always known him or something. It was very odd. I think we're just kind of cut from the same cloth. I mean, he's very working class, and you know, people never ever believe me when I say this, but so am I. And the reason people don't believe me is because I speak very well and I'm English and I've always spoken very well and I'm an actor and I've had success in my career. And so there are all kinds of sort of preconceived ideas that people have of me that are classically trained and reading Shakespeare and reciting poetry at nighttime kind of thing. And the reality is the only reason I speak well is because my grandmother on my mother's side was trained as an actress. So she spoke well. Subsequently, so did my mother, and then so did all of us. But I mean, I'm proper, working class with real socialist parents. So 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 so
So
I
you
don't know,
related to him. Yeah.
yeah, we just really connected right away. But also, he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's a very sensitive person. He's very honest about the struggles he'd had in his life as an actor and his love-hate relationship with acting. That subsequently means that he has tremendous understanding of actors. So I felt really supported right away. And I knew that playing Mary was going to be quite frightening for me. I knew it wasn't going to come naturally, and I was nervous, about playing her, even though I knew I wanted the challenge and wanted to be part of this process with Francis. I knew I would need someone to guide me a bit.
Well, did
Because
you find the script a little frightening because you could tell that there was not a lot of words to work with? You are going to be acting between the lines a
well,
lot.
that's exactly. So it wasn't really so much the lack of actual words it didn't strike me in that way. It was more, playing Mary, there were two emotions that I wasn't allowed to show very often, almost no happiness, no smiling,
Mm.
and sadness, no tears. And those are two emotions that actors really do lean on quite a lot. And they're certainly emotions that I am no stranger to in my career and also in my life. So learning how to use up anything in between those two very powerful emotions was very new for me and really very odd.
When you
And
did get to emote, though, you knew you were going to be delivering a huge payoff.
well, that was it. I had to earn it. So, but learning how to internalize very obvious emotions like pride, happiness, sadness, joy, longing, learning how to feel, internalize, and find ways of expressing those things without words and just using my face was um was quite terrifying and very unnatural for me. Very, very unnatural. So keeping those things internalized was something I didn't feel comfortable with. And I had to rely on Francis. He would sometimes say to me, don't touch your face. Stop touching your face. Don't, no smile, not even a hint of it. No, Winslet, we're saving that. Remember, we're going to save the smile for the scene when she puts the perfume on your hands. So we had to plan and choose these very sparse moments of real relief and emotion, because Mary Anning was not a woman who expressed emotion, because she didn't have that much, frankly, reason to in her life. And building the backstory for her was really, really important, because it helped me to understand not just who she was, but why she did things in the way that she did. So her father had died when she was very young, and she had loved him and really doted on him. She'd always had a quite tricky relationship with her mother. But I think losing her father perhaps created a sense of sort of abandonment issues for her. And so whenever she formed a closeness with someone, she would get to a point where all she would know how to do was to try and keep that person in her private, isolated world for herself. And she would have no capacity or understanding at all with how you step into the real world and still feel those same things for that person without being threatened by external forces or other
Hmm.
people's connections with those individuals. And that came into play with Charlotte, as we see in the scene when they're at the music recital and she simply can't handle the fact that Charlotte isn't even sitting near her. And it was a very fine line for Frances and I, and it was something that we really fought for, actually. I'd say this was the only thing we really kind of felt ourselves fighting for with Mary. It's a fine line between envy and jealousy and petulance and childish behavior. And I was absolutely determined that it felt as though she had emotional chips missing. That meant she was jealous and envious and not childish and petulant, which are much more surfacey things. It was important to me that the longing and the love that she feels for Charlotte came from a genuine place, and that her desire to want to have her all to herself also came from a place of wanting to be loved and wanting to be known. And it's a film, for me, it's a film about how we choose to love and how that can end up defining who we are.
She has this extraordinary strength, and you play her in a way that allows us to feel for her. She can be off-putting, and you're willing
Yeah,
to go there. You're very willing, and that's a thing that I think all actors have to struggle with. I mean, you
yeah,
want people to like you, and there's a
yeah.
difference between making someone attractive and appealing and making them someone that you feel empathy for.
Try playing Hannah Schmidt.
That worked out okay.
Fucking hell. Well, that was where I mean, it's I feel just what you're talking about there, I feel I was exploring that a lot in my 20s, because I realized that in my 20s I was trying to get audiences to like me,
Mm.
trying to get audiences to like the characters I was playing, therefore like me, which is fucking bullshit. You just can't do that as an actor if you want to be prepared to get offered interesting parts, that run the gamut of range and require for such different emotional rhythms and stages to a character. I mean, I think empathy is something I think it's okay to ask for, but not sympathy. And I also think you have to earn it. I mean, you do.
Explain. That's very interesting.
Well, there's a difference, isn't there? I mean, why would you sympathize with Hannah Schmidt? You might empathize with her because you might understand the things that she did. But how can you sympathize with that character? Your human emotions will not allow for sympathy. There's no space for that. So it was about knowing what I was allowed to anticipate, I suppose, and trying not to manipulate. You can't trick your audience. You can't manipulate your audience. All you can do is be true to the character, truthful and integral and grounded within the part. And with Mary, the thing about Mary is that there are some things about her that are automatically unreadable, subsequently maybe a little bit unlikable. She's an unknowable figure. But there's no point playing any one of those things with full force. It makes more sense to understand the person and the beginning of her life and the reason why she lived the way she did, the reason why she had a hard time expressing even affection for her own mother. These were all things that I needed to come to understand in order to have an understanding of her and for myself to be able to empathize with Mary and her way of living. The thing is, Mary was a formidable character. She was extraordinary. I have huge admiration for her and loved her very much.
So talk about what you had. You had to learn how to walk that rocky, Dorset coast. You had to figure out how to find these extinct mollusks. I mean, you became
Yeah.
Mary Anning.
I had to try and become her as much. I mean, listen, I'm a very hardy person. I mean, people would worry, they say, oh God, Kate, we don't have this, we couldn't afford a stunt double, how are you gonna climb up the thing? But don't hurt yourself. I go, oh God, I'll be absolutely fine. Everyone stop worrying. Up I go, down I come, back up I go, and back down I come again. Like, it was just not, to me, it was just not a big deal, and I'm aware of my physical self. I'm very strong. I know how to not get injured. I've done a lot of that stuff for years and years. And, the kind of vacations my husband and our family have, even my siblings have, we have wind and rain camping style holidays. We are out in the elements. We're not on beaches being waited on with, strawberry daiquiris. That is just not our thing. So, we do whistling and cooking on beaches. We don't do fancy schmancy. So this was just that side of being in the elements just felt very natural to me and actually close to home. So I had no problem with that. But learning how to fossil hunt was very detailed, but learning how to use the tools that Mary would have used was even harder. Because of course nowadays they just use a big old, robust hammer that's not going to break. You try and whack a nodule in search of an ammonite with an old-fashioned tool, and the hammerhead could fling back in your face because it's so old. These things that would just break all the time. So I used her bags. I used the things she would use. I used the cloth that she would have wrapped around her tools. I wore the shoes that I wore in the film. I wore when I was learning how to fossil find, because that made a big difference to just have my physical self, a sense of lethargy, my posture. All of those things were important, and it was a character. I had to just take what I could get for free. I didn't want to live in the comfy crew accommodation or the nice centrally heated houses where everyone else was living. I was able to find a cottage that was exposed on two sides to the elements and right on a beach, a different beach, not directly in Lyme Regis, but about a 20-minute drive away, but still on the Jurassic stretch of coastline. And actually where I was living during our shoot, a massive section of cliff collapsed onto the beach with huge landslide. It was on the BBC News, massive landslide. And I was like, oh, lucky I didn't go for a walk that day. But I lived in this house and I lived alone from Monday till Friday, and there was no television, and I just lived this very quiet, isolated life that was sometimes quite frightening. When there was wind and rain and the hail and it's lashing at the building, and literally the waves are so big that the spray is hitting the bedroom window. And everything's rattling around me, and I'm just lying there going, "It's for the good of my work, for the good of my work, for the good of my work. Do not go and get a latte right now. Do not go." And I just lived this very quiet little life, and I had the radio, and I would do my drawing. I had to learn how to draw because that was what Mary did in order to document her finds, and I'm not a very good artist, so I had to very much learn that.
So we were going to look at the Fiona Shaw scene, which it's like a revelation. You just learn so many things in that one scene. That must have been fun to, because there's more going on.
In the scene with Fiona when she comes for tea. Well, Fiona and I were both quite nervous actually about that scene because the dialogue is so exquisite, and it just had to be so still, and it's so on our faces, that everything can be read, which means that it could also be read in the wrong way, so we just had to be so very, very careful. And it's really Mary's only moment of actual emotion in terms of sadness, in terms of tears, and actually I think I remember feeling quite sick because it was such a relief to be able to allow something to move from your esophagus and actually come up, rather than just holding it here the whole time, which so much of the film was for me. And it was wonderful to work with Fiona, who's like, Fiona Shaw is the definition of formidable, and I just have admired her so much for so long. And she was also having some great success with Killing Eve and winning some awards at the time they were making the film. And so it was a really kind of exciting time to be around her. And she's just so thorough and brilliant. And it was exciting to work with Fee. It really was.
So you and Saoirse also had to navigate and self-choreograph the intimate scenes, which is
Mm.
another area where your character finally gets to open the doors.
Mm.
So how did you do that? How did that work?
Because there are so few actual words shared between these two women as the longing and the desire and the passion starts to develop. It's so subtle and it's so quiet without being obviously romantic at any moment, that it was an opportunity to express the romance and express the passion between the two of them. And not just because it's a particular period in history when public displays of any degree of affection at all, whether between a man and a woman or otherwise, was accepted. It was just not done at all. So it was important to find the right balance. This was not something that was happening behind closed doors because that was a part of our narrative. Our narrative is not about a relationship between two women that is hidden from society because of fear or judgment. The fact that this relationship is the story is between two women who fall in love just is part of the story. I don't know if I explain myself very well. What I mean to say is I was always very impressed with Francis in how he crafted the relationship between these two women and never built fear or hesitation because they were two women into the story. Do you see what I'm saying? I love the fact that it's just a love story between two people who happen to be women. I just loved that.
But he
What
also
were you going to
doesn't
say?
go with the obvious. I feel like he avoids a certain kind of romantic trope that you would find in most movies about relationships. There's some kind of opening up of your character. There's an extraordinary expression between the two women, but the movie itself isn't pushing romance per se.
That's right. I agree with you. It isn't pushing romance. The romance is not a part of the narrative at all. It's all about subtlety, nuance, and frankly, other narratives. It's a film about, as I said before, it's so much about how who we choose to love can end up defining who we are. It's passionate without being obviously romantic. Unintentionally, it's intentionally subtle and quiet, which are a reflection of Mary Anning's day in and day out rhythms. And within the story, also allowed the space for longing and for desire. And those things keep it away from those romantic tropes and things that you were just talking about. And it's also a story about how these two women discover more about themselves because of their love for each other than, do you see what I mean? They discover
Yeah.
more about themselves than they do about each other together as a couple, which is so often the case when one falls deeply and really truthfully in love, or when one has one's heart broken. And it's also a story about the power of finding love unexpectedly in a place you may never imagine to find it, and getting totally lost in the love that you can feel for a person, unexpectedly. And to me, those were the things that struck me the most when I read the script, because to me that it was very real in that way. It wasn't feeding into some movie demographic, and I admired that in the same way that I admired God's Own Country for those exact reasons.
Yes, I applaud. I applaud this. So, as we head toward our close, it strikes me, as we were saying earlier, that you're attracted to dangerous roles almost physically and emotionally super challenging. We talked about Steve Jobs. That was a challenging, difficult role. Even the mountain between us. You're up in the winter in the
Yeah.
Alps somewhere. I mean, talk about unpleasant. And then now you're underwater for 7 minutes. I have to ask you. I mean, really, you're going back in there with Jim Cameron, who is the most demanding director alive.
Well, I mean, you're right. I'm definitely attracted. I think I'm attracted to things that are going to be a challenge, that
Yeah.
scare me, and that I know I have to pull on something of myself that is different from the last time or the time before that in order to play that part. And I've always said this, and I still believe it. You're only as good as your last gig. And if I don't keep reinventing the wheel, then how can I expect people to hope for interesting things from me? I just don't want to give the same thing all the time, and sometimes that does mean stepping right out of the comfort zone. So, well, Jim, I have so much respect for Jim Cameron. When I look back on Titanic, really, when I look back on it, this was a film that we shot 6-day weeks for 7.5 months, 4.5 months of which were by night shoots. He had so much pressure on him. No wonder he needed to hold it together. No wonder he needed to be a perfectionist. And no wonder he knew what he wanted. And no wonder he would get frustrated if he didn't feel he was going to get it, or there was something that posed a threat to it. So now that I'm older, I do have a greater understanding of just simply what he was pulling off. In any case, Avatar is his baby. He has invented these worlds, he's invented these people, and he's invented this way of filmmaking, which made him so comfortable, I think, and so happy to just be in a world that he understands and feels excited by and tremendously proud of. And frankly, stepping into it was just amazing. I mean, it was just such a thrill to be part of something, to walk onto a stage and say, so just tell me again, how many cameras are actually in this room? And they'll go, duh, 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 duh. Well, if you don't count the ones that are on the ground, there's probably, maybe between like 180 and 210 actual ways of capturing your motion in this room. And there's a bank of computers with technicians sitting at them, almost like an auditorium right there in front of you. It's utterly fascinating, and they're all doing their own specialized job. So
And
that
you can
was
see the environment as you're shooting in it.
no,
You don't.
you can't see anything. You can see like it's like being in a large aircraft hangar. The floor feels like an oversized gymnasium, and spaces would be marked out on the floor. So if you're filming in a hut, in someone's home, and it's a hut, you have the boundary lines taped out for you on the ground. If you're walking up a bridge, they might have created some slanted structure with scaffolding and wooden planks, so that you at least know the physical geography of where you might need to start from and go to. There's a scene between Sigourney and I where we're up in a cave, and so we had a series of platforms that were built to create a sort of an elevated structure that helps us to understand the geography of the scene. Sometimes we might have had printed out images that were very basic in terms of a sort of a rough animation of what the scene would end up looking like, with vague animated images of our characters in there. But it was utterly wonderful, and learning how to free dive. I mean, I just
Did it give you
loved
a sense of
every second.
accomplishment? A kind
Oh,
of like, I can do this? Like,
well, it not just I can do this, but humans can do this. I mean, unless you have a significant medical condition, it's something with training that people can do. And I've always loved the water. I've always been an incredibly strong swimmer. I was always the first in on a cold October day, when I was little. But to be able to reach physical what's the word I'm even looking for? To be able to achieve something physically, that I never would have imagined I would be. I mean, it was completely amazing and very relaxing. Very relaxing. I mean, it's like, honestly, it's like, I'd sometimes, if I'm feeling really stressed, I'll say to my husband, "Oh my God, let's just go and do a breath hold, babe. Let's just quickly go and do a breath hold." Because you have to have someone, you can't do them on your own ever. You have to
Uh,
have someone there because you can black out. And actually, my husband we were training together and he was pushing himself one day and I'm like, oh, and I'm tapping him to come up. I'm like, okay, Neddy, another 15 seconds and then you're coming up. Okay. Finally, he got to like, I don't know, 4 minutes and 32 seconds. And I'm like, okay, I'm pulling you up. Pulled him up and he did his breathing sequence, the breathing sequence you're supposed to do when you come up from a long breath hold, and blacked out on the surface, which is where the majority of blackouts actually do happen. And he blacked out. So then I had to do my safety. So I did all my safety and I knew what I was doing. And so it was an amazing thing that we got to learn together.
I have to.
But he didn't get to 7 minutes and 14 seconds. That was
No, you did,
I
which is
did. Yeah.
remarkable. All right, we could go on, but
Yes, we
they're
could go
wrapping
on.
us up, and it's always a pleasure, Kate.